Krishna. Hare Krishna. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chaksh
Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yutapadakkamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana
Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Sapta Kanjana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustuti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanjakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhayeva cha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gauravakta
Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna
Hare Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Yahsvanubhavam Akila Shruti-saram Ekam Madhyatmadipam Atititirstatam Tamondam Samsarinam Karunayaha Purana Guhyam Tam Vyasa Sunumupyayami Guru Muni Mam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Shashwat, for the wonderful recital of the Mangalacharan and of text 3. Thank you very much, Shashwat. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Please accept our humble obeisances from everybody who have joined the group and are about to join, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and we are on Canto 1, Chapter 2. And the text for today is text 3, Prabhuji.
Yes,
Prabhuji, so I'll hand over to you, or would you like us? We have just read the Sanskrit shloka, but we have not read the translation and purport.
Okay.
But how do we do this today? I'll
yes.
hand over to you and then you
Yes,
can.
Mataji, I thought since it's a fairly lengthy purport and there's a few of us on the call, perhaps I'll read the translation and then yes, we can perhaps split up the purport. So please accept my humble obeisances, everyone. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And thank you once again to Kirtika, Mataji, Pataprem, Prabhu, and everyone for allowing me the opportunity to try and say something today. And I'm also very excited to be with you here today because it's a very special day. It's the appearance of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj, who is the spiritual master, so almost our kind of grandfather or great-grandfather spiritual master and he's the spiritual master of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So at the end of the class, I will be speaking a little bit about him as well. So yes, thank you, Shastri Prabhu, for a wonderful prayers and a delightful recitation. So the translation: let me offer my respectful obeisances unto him, Shuka, the spiritual master of all sages, the son of Vyasadeva, who, out of his great compassion for those gross materialists who struggle to cross over the darkest regions of material existence, spoke the most confidential supplement to the cream of Vedic knowledge after having personally assimilated it by experience. So I'll read the first paragraph. In this prayer, Srila Sutta Goswami practically summarizes the complete introduction of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural supplementary commentary of the Vedanta Sutras. The Vedanta Sutras, or the Brahma Sutras, were compiled by Vyasadeva with a view to presenting just the cream of Vedic knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam is the natural commentary on this cream. Srila Sukadeva Goswami was a thoroughly realized master on Vedanta Sutra, and consequently, he also personally realized the commentary Srimad Bhagavatam. And just to show his boundless mercy upon bewildered materialistic men who want to cross completely over nescience, he recited for the first time this confidential knowledge. Would anyone like to read the next paragraph?
There is no point in arguing that a materialistic man can be happy. No materialistic creatures, be he the great Brahma or the insignificant ant, can be happy. Everyone tries to make a permanent plan for happiness, but everyone is baffled by the laws of material nature. Therefore, the materialistic world is called the darkest region of God's creation. Yet, the unhappy materialistics can get out of it simply by desiring to get out. Unfortunately, they are so foolish that they do not want to escape. Therefore, they are compared to the camel who relishes thorny twigs because he tastes the taste of twigs mixed with his blood. He does not realize that it is his own blood and that his tongue is being cut by the thorns. Similarly, to the materialist, his own blood is as sweet as honey, and although he is always harassed by his own material creations, he does not wish to escape. Such materialists are also called karmis. Out of hundreds of thousands of karmis, only a few may feel tired of material engagement and desire to get out of the labyrinth. Such intelligent persons are called jnanis. The Vedanta Sutra is directed to such jnanis, but Srila Vyasadeva, being the incarnation of the Supreme Lord, could foresee the misuse of Vedanta Sutra by unscrupulous men, and therefore he personally supplemented the Vedanta Sutra with Bhagavata Purana. It is clearly said that this Bhagavatam is the original commentary of the Brahma Sutras. Srila Vyasadeva also instructed the Bhagavatam to his own son, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who was already at the liberated stage of transcendence. Srila Sukadeva realized it personally and then explained it. By the mercy of Srila Sukadeva, the Bhagavata Vedanta Sutra is available for all those sincere souls who want to get out of material existence. Hare Krishna, Arya Govindas Prabhuji. Can you continue?
Yes, Mataji. Srimad Bhagavatam is the one unrivaled commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Sripada Shankaracharya intentionally did not touch it because he knew that the natural commentary would be difficult for him to surpass. He wrote his Sharirika Bhashya, and his so-called followers deprecated the Bhagavatam as some new presentation. One should not be misled by such propaganda directed against the Bhagavatam by the Mayavada school. From the introductory sloka, the beginning student should know that Srimad Bhagavatam is the only transcendental literature meant for those who are Paramahamsas and completely freed from the material disease called malaise. The Mayavadis are envious of the personality of Godhead, despite Sripada Shankaracharya's admission that Narayana, the personality of Godhead, is above the material creation. The envious Mayavadi cannot have access to the Bhagavatam. But those who are really anxious to get out of this material existence may take shelter of this Bhagavatam, because it is uttered by the liberated Srila Sukadeva Goswami. It is the transcendental torchlight by which one can see perfectly the transcendental absolute truth realized as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Hare Krishna Kirtika Maji. Thank you so much, Hare Govinda Prabhu Kirtika Maji, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So a very wonderful verse, very deep purport, and so many points in here which we could speak upon, so much to cover, but I wanted to just focus on 2 points which maybe we can discuss throughout the course of today. The first point being, as is mentioned, the son of Vyasadeva, who out of his great compassion for those gross materialists who struggle to cross over the darkest regions of material existence. So I want to just expand a little bit on this point, how material existence cannot be enjoyed. And Srila Prabhupada gives a wonderful example in his purport. And the second point I wanted to make is about compassion. So the compassion of a Vaishnava. Here we have Sukadeva Goswami, such a compassionate Vaishnava who is speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam ultimately for the benefit of everyone who is struggling in their material existence. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about compassion, and I've got a little acronym which perhaps we could use to remember how we can also practice compassion to others in the context of Krishna consciousness. So the first point, material existence cannot be enjoyed. Well, it's interesting that in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says there's no point in arguing that a materialistic man can be happy. No materialistic creature, be he the great Brahma or an insignificant ant, can be happy. So if you can remember in earlier when we were discussing the Bhagavad Gita, one of my favorite verses, which I often quote, is Abrahma bhuvna loka punaravarti norjana mamuteya tukonteya punarjanma na vidyate. So even from the highest planet, so that's Brahmaloka, where Brahma resides, it's a heavenly planet. There's so much opulence. So the people are more beautiful, as we've discussed before. The senses can be enjoyed in much more higher ways than we can here on Earth. Down to the lowest region, Pitraloka, all the places of misery where, because repeated birth and death takes place. Well, Krishna says to Arjuna, those who reach my abode, they'll never take birth again. So we can see here that I just wanted to kind of emphasize here, and Srila Prabhupada gives an amazing example of how a camel is chewing thorns. So if you can imagine a camel chewing thorns and thinking, oh, I'm enjoying so much, but the camel is actually hurting itself because it's bleeding. And what that juicy feeling it's getting in its mouth is its own blood from chewing on the thorns. And actually, this can very much be us in one sense, trying to exploit the material energy, thinking that we can enjoy. I remember when I was a young boy, and I used to like chocolate very much. And there's one occasion, I think I was about 6 or 7, and I ate so much chocolate on one occasion that I felt sick. My stomach was sick, but my tongue still wanted more chocolate. So here we can see that the senses are never satisfied. You know, we can try and get more money. We can try and get engage our senses more and more. We can get more opulence, but it will never fully satisfy our senses. There's a wonderful text which I would recommend you all to read. It's called the Nectar of Instruction. And within the Nectar of Instruction, there's a wonderful verse which says that one who has conquered the demands of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So the tongue, especially the demands of the tongue, it's never satisfied. We always want to speak ill things, so we can control our tongue and try to only speak things which are in line with the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, which are truthful, non-agitating others, pleasing, but also speaking wherever possible about Krishna or in the context of Krishna consciousness. So yeah, this is how a few examples of how we may try, and even once we start practicing Krishna consciousness, try to exploit the material energy, try to enjoy. But ultimately, by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, by reading Bhagavad Gita, we can remember that material existence, it can't be enjoyed. There's no point arguing that materialistic man can be happy. And there's so many examples of this. So Srila Prabhupada then goes on to talk about in the purport about this concept of karmis, jnanis. So karmis, he mentions in the purport, are materialists, but interestingly, karmis are actually a higher level of materialist. So not necessarily the materialist that you see out in the world today, but karmis are actually a high level of materialists who enjoy the material, who try to enjoy the material energy, but within the rules and regulations of the Vedas. So actually, you could say that the majority of people in this world are not even on the level of karmis. But karmis, they follow certain rules and regulations with the Vedas, and their object is of life is to enjoy as much as possible, but at least following scriptural injunctions. But then higher than this are jnanis. So such intelligent persons are called jnanis, who are tired of material engagement and try to figure out, understand the scriptures. But as we perhaps have discussed in other classes, that it can be very hard. There's so many scriptures, you have so many Vedas, so many Puranas, and our capacity in Kali Yuga is very limited. And what to speak of, we have limited time, we have limited memory, we have limited energy. So how can we understand this, and how can we understand all of this science? So thankfully, we've been given the cream, the explanation of the cream, and here it is explained that this is Srimad Bhagavatam, commentary on the cream of Vedic knowledge. So if we can just engage with the Srimad Bhagavatam, and there's one ingredient missing, and one type of person who is even higher than a jnani, can anyone have a think to who that might be?
Bhakta.
Bhakta, of course. Thank you very much, Babaji. So it's explained in the Bhagavad Gita that through from Krishna comes all intelligence. Now, I'm not sure how many of you were on the call last week, but I was very much in awe of Sutta Prabhu and how he was able to quote so many verses, explain so wonderfully the pastimes of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya. And I was thinking to myself, this is not normal. You know, like, how can someone remember all of this in this day and age? And I was thinking to myself, if I did very much lots of study of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, I still don't think I could be able to remember all these verses so much. And what is the reason? That devotees, we can see many devotees, I'm sure I've heard some classes here as well, by the wonderful devotees who give classes on other days as well. They're able to recite and remember so many things about Krishna. And why is that? It's because of their devotion. So only through the mercy of Krishna can we really understand. And it's never really through our endeavor. We can only put ourselves in a position to receive the mercy of Krishna. So I actually was sat in a class on after Nityananda Trayadashi, and I asked the question, why is it that so many people, they don't come to this conclusion that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Why can't they understand? And I feel sorry for them. You know, within the purport, it's mentioned that Mayavadis cannot understand this supreme science. So it's actually mentioned in the purport why they can't understand this supreme science, and they can't understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Would anyone like to take a stab of why that is? So here we can see within the purport that Srila Prabhupada actually says the Mayavadis are envious of the personality of Godhead. So they're actually envious of Krishna. So, and in many cases, they actually want to be God. They want to be Krishna. So in this sense, because of that mentality, they're unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And they want to be in that position of God. And we can all see, perhaps, I know for myself, I'm speaking for myself, sometimes we can be in this position where we want to control everyone. We want to have that position of authority. And even within Krishna consciousness, we want a big position. We want people to bow down to us and say how amazing we are. And in this position, even on a subtle level, we can see we want to be God. However, Krishna is very merciful. Last week, it was Nityananda Trayadashi. Lord Nityananda, he's an incarnation of Lord Balaram. And it's explained that Balaram is actually more merciful than Krishna. So Krishna, sometimes he has strict standards. If people are envious of him, he won't give them the mercy. But there was one person within the Mahabharata who actually was envious of Krishna, but he got mercy from Lord Balaram. In fact, Lord Balaram accepted him as his disciple. That person was the enemy of the Pandavas, Duryodhana. So believe it or not, Lord Balaram actually accepted Duryodhana as his disciple and trained him in the art of mace fighting. Now, I was wondering, why is it that such a character as Duryodhana was accepted by Lord Balaram? But actually, as we read later in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there was an occasion after the battle of Kurukshetra, where Lord Balaram, who did not engage in the battle of Kurukshetra, went on a pilgrimage, and he came across an assembly of sages who honored him appropriately. But there was one sage who was sat actually on the Vyasasan at that time, and he did not pay his respects to Lord Balaram. So at that very moment, this was sage Ramaharshana. And at that very moment, Lord Balaram, he grabbed a straw reed, and with that straw reed, he actually killed the sage. So I was thinking, in my mind, I was thinking, why is it that Lord Balaram, he accepts Duryodhana as his disciple, but yet he kills this sage who's speaking Vedanta? How is that possible? And then I realized that actually, and it's explained nicely in a class by a wonderful speaker, His Grace Kartik Chandra Prabhu, that Balaram, he's more merciful than Krishna. He will accept those even who are envious of Krishna, like Duryodhana. But what he won't accept is those who are not submissive. So Duryodhana submitted to Lord Balaram and accepted him as his master, whereas the sage or Maharshana failed to be submissive and pay respect. So this is another explanation of perhaps why Mayavadis, they cannot understand Krishna. It's because they're not willing to be submissive. So this is a few points on why material existence cannot be enjoyed, and how this Mayavadi, the Mayavadis, they're never really so happy, whereas Krishna and Bhakti is such a relishable, enjoyable experience, because Krishna is a person and he wants us to enjoy our relationship with him. So the next point I wanted to make is upon compassion. And the great compassion of Vaishnavas, one amazing quality of Vaishnavas is their compassion. None such more than even Sukadeva Goswami, who's speaking the Srimad Bhagavatam out of compassion for the fallen souls. So I wanted to give an acronym, which perhaps is more for my benefit, to remember how we can actually practice compassion in our lives and in the context of Krishna consciousness. So if you could remember this acronym, LEARN. LEARN. So how can we practice compassion? People are suffering so much every day. We come across people who are going through so many material difficulties. So the first letters are L and E, which is listen and empathize. So at one point in the Battle of Kurukshetra, at this point, Arjuna has heard the entire Bhagavad Gita from Krishna, and he's a pure devotee of the Lord. So he understands the philosophy perfectly. He understands that we are not the body, that we are the soul, that we are the Atma, and the soul is imperishable. But at one point in the battle, his 16-year-old son, Abhimanyu, he had heard of a formula to enter a battle structure from the Kauravas. He had heard actually in the womb. But the problem was he hadn't heard how to get out. So Abhimanyu, being such a brave warrior, enters into the formation of the Kauravas and along the way kills so many of the opposing army's warriors. But unfortunately, he cannot escape. He's surrounded by the enemy, at which point he is unfortunately killed. So at this point, Arjun, as you can imagine, he's just lost his 16-year-old son, and he's distraught. At this point, he is completely inconsolable. And Krishna, he doesn't speak philosophy to him. He consoles him. But the very next day, Arjuna comes back with even more ferocity and kills even more of the Kauravas, comes back with more enthusiasm to fight the battle. So in one sense, we could say, well, why is it that Arjuna is lamenting so much? He's heard the Bhagavad Gita straight from Krishna. And unlike us, he's a pure devotee of the Lord, so he understands the philosophy perfectly. Dahina smin yata dehe, gomaram yovajam jara. A sober man is not bewildered by such a change of a body changing from boyhood to youth to old age to death. But we can understand here that even Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is able to offer compassion by listening and empathizing with Arjuna. So in the same way, we meet many people who are suffering materially, and perhaps maybe, and I'm speaking to myself here, rather than offering them all the solutions and trying to be a mini guru, we can just listen and empathize with them. The next point is A. So L and E is listen and empathize. A stands for avoid the envious and materialistic. So I've experienced in my life many times where I've been very enthusiastic to spread Krishna consciousness and talk to many people about how amazing Krishna consciousness is. However, as I'm sure you all know, there are 10 offenses to the holy name. And one of the offenses is to instruct a faithless person on the glories of the holy name. So here we have to use our intelligence and gauge where a person is at. I remember once I was in a workplace and I was working with a manager many years ago who had traveled to India, and he'd heard about Krishna, and he found out that I was actually an aspiring devotee of Lord Krishna. And having known a little bit about Krishna, he would mock me, and he would mock Krishna. And he would say things like, oh, you worship, a blue god, and he has so many, he steals other people's wives and so forth, not understanding the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Now, my initial thought was to perhaps defeat him in an argument. But however, we have to be very careful here, because there's certain people, no matter how much we explain Krishna consciousness, because of their enviousness and materialistic nature, they won't understand. And in fact, we're causing offenses to them by engaging in talking about Krishna to them and for ourselves. So it's explained in a summary of the Bhakti Rasa Sindhu called the Nectar of Devotion, that one should do three things in this situation. One can either defeat that person in an argument if someone is making an offense to Krishna or the Vaishnavas. One can put one's life on the line, or one can leave that place. So in these kind of cases, what we can do instead is avoid engaging in these people if we can, especially avoid talking about Krishna. But what we can do is we can pray for them, and we can show them not by the philosophy, but by our actions, by our humility, and by our behavior, that Krishna consciousness is the right path to follow. And through that behavior, perhaps we can change their hearts. So we've talked about learn, L and E, listen and empathize. A, avoid envious and materialistic. R stands for ripe fruits. So pick the ripe fruits. So in Krishna consciousness, if we want to be compassionate to others and tell them all about the glories of Krishna, there's certain people out there who you will tell are very ripe fruits. So whenever we're talking about Krishna consciousness, or even engaging in conversations about our lives, we'll meet certain people who are very interested to know what we're engaging in. So we perhaps will say, yes, I practice spirituality and meditation, mantra meditation, and I went to the temple on the weekend. And certain people will find are extremely interested to know about our spiritual activities. These people are what's known as ripe fruits. They've come to the level where they're very, very ready to be plucked and engaged in Krishna consciousness. I remember many, many years ago when I was in my early 20s, and I was at university in the Midlands in Leicester in England. And I remember seeing some devotees on Harinam. At that time, I was not so interested in spirituality. And I saw the devotees, and I'm very ashamed to say, and I pray that the Vaishnavas can forgive me for my offenses, but I looked at those devotees and thought, those guys are crazy. You know, they're dancing on the street and all this kind of thing, and dressed in tilak and dhoti. And if at that time you had told me that 10 years later I would be doing the same thing, I would have thought you were crazy. But yet there I was, 10 years later, I was there with a huge Hare Krishna sign, dancing on the streets of London and chanting Hare Krishna. So at that point, I wasn't a ripe fruit. I wasn't ready to be plucked and receive the knowledge of Krishna consciousness. And I hadn't perhaps received the mercy of the Vaishnavas yet, and hadn't gone through enough material trials and tribulations to be tired of this materialistic life. So in that sense, when we're showing compassion to others, we can try and use our intelligence and see who are those ripe fruits who are ready to be plucked. And you'll be very surprised that sometimes people, it's just not their time yet, as it was for me. And there's a wonderful speaker and spiritual master in ISKCON, His Holiness Devamrita Swami. And I remember in one class, he actually said that when he first started practicing Krishna consciousness, forget chanting one round, he would chant one bead. So he just chant once, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Nam Nam, Hare Hare, once. And that was his chanting for the day. And he said, now look where I am. So we never know at what pace and who people are. And we can just look out for these ripe fruits. Finally, the last point. So we've talked about L and E, listen and empathize. A, avoid the envious and materialistic. R, look for the ripe fruits. N, the final one, is do the needful. So this again is emphasizing all the rest of the points. Needful means meeting people where they're at, as we've said. So distinguishing whether they're envious and materialistic or whether they're ripe fruits. But needful also means showing kindness. So often I've found that there's a very amazing speaker, a mentor of mine, and I was very nervous upon giving my first class of Bhagavad Gita many years ago. And he said to me something very profound, which I always remember, very simple as well. He said, Kamal, Prabhu, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So just speak what you know. And when people really feel that they care, that you care about them, then they'll take an interest in what you have to say. So this is doing the needful, showing kindness. So sometimes people, they may not be ready to practice Krishna consciousness yet, but we never know when they're going to become a ripe fruit. So in that sense, we can still show them compassion. And this is very, very nicely explained, actually, in the Bhagavad Gita. So the charity in the three modes. So of course, we perhaps wouldn't give a homeless person some Lakshmi, because that would be charity in the mode of ignorance. And they may spend it on something that is not so good for them. And then we would also receive reaction for that. But we can empathize, we can listen to them, we can perhaps give them some prasadam. And in that way, we can help people and at least show them that practitioners of Krishna consciousness are very kind. And the final point within doing the needful is just encouraging the good that people are doing within others. So even if they're coming to the temple a little bit, even if they're reading a little bit of Bhagavad Gita, even if they chant every now and again, we can encourage the good, what people are doing. And this will inspire people to engage in Krishna consciousness more and more. I'd like to share a little pastime before we conclude the class, which shows actually also doing the needful means that we can show tolerance, as I did to my manager, but to a certain level. So there's a wonderful pastime later in the Bhagavatam, and an amazing personality. In fact, he's often referred to as the greatest Vaishnava. This is Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva, his first wife was Sati, and Sati was the son of Daksh. So Daksh was a great Brahmin. Now, on one occasion, there was a great sacrifice, a great yajna to be held. And Daksh, being not so favorable to Lord Shiva, not happy about his beautiful daughter Sati being married to the great Lord Shiva, who lived a very renounced life and lived in a certain way, as we know that Lord Shiva is often covered in ash and can associate with certain creatures such as even ghosts and goblins. So Daksh was not so happy about this and would often insult Lord Shiva, but Lord Shiva would take this and would not retaliate. However, his wife Sati, not being invited to the great yajna, felt greatly hurt by her father and decided to attend against the wishes of her husband, Lord Shiva. Upon attending the yajna, Lord Daksh, he ignored his own daughter, and Sati, feeling such humiliation at the hands of her father, actually decided to enter the yajna and take her own life. Upon hearing how his wife had been insulted at the yajna, Lord Shiva became furious and sent an incarnation to destroy the brahmanas, the yagna, and actually remove the head of Daksh. Such was his opulence and such was his power, Lord Shiva. He was able not to kill Lord Daksh, but still remove his head. And actually, Sati, as we know, was reincarnated and also later became the wife of Lord Shiva as Parvati. But what is the lesson here, and why do I mention this? Although we may not be Lord Shiva and start chopping people's heads off who insult the Vaishnavas, the lesson here for us on a practical level is not to, we don't need to stand for people who insult our philosophy or insult the Vaishnavas. And as mentioned in the Nectar of Instruction, if we're wherever possible, we're able to leave those places and leave the association of those people. Or another point is just kindly inform them that we don't appreciate that kind of behavior and we won't tolerate as such. So being a devotee means, yes, we tolerate insults to ourselves, but we don't tolerate insults to the Vaishnavas and to Krishna. So those are some thoughts on the text today. We talked about material existence, how it cannot be enjoyed. Srila Prabhupada so nicely explains that trying to enjoy is like a camel chewing thorns and enjoying its own blood. And we talked about compassion, the compassion of Sukadev Goswami, and how I gave an acronym, LEARN, how we can listen, empathize, avoid envious and materialistic, pick the ripe fruits who are ready for Krishna consciousness, and do the needful to everyone, regardless of how ripe or not they are for Krishna consciousness. And we've got a very few minutes left, and it's a very special day today. And it's actually the appearance day of the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada, his divine grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, who is an emblem of compassion. And I thought it's only appropriate, before we conclude today, that I say a few words glorifying such an amazing, wonderful personality. And you could say our great grandfather in the line of the disciplic succession. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, so many, how could I even justify in a few minutes what to say about this great personality? A summary would be, he was the son actually of another great Vaishnava saint in our line, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. When he was born, it was very auspicious because even his umbilical cord was wrapped in such a way that it was like a Brahmin thread around his body. Now, at a very, very young age, there's a very sweet pastime. Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj at that point was only 2 or 3 years old. And his father had taken aside a mango to offer to the deities, but he hadn't offered it yet. So at which point, a young Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj took the mango for himself. He was chastised by his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who told him, this is something wrong you've done. This was, I'd set aside for the deities. And at such a young age, such was his magnanimous, pious, I have no words to describe, that he actually took a vow from that point, which he followed for the rest of his life. He said, this is a great offense I've committed. From this day forth, I will never consume mangoes. Words do not, I cannot really put into words how amazing this is for any individual, especially I really love mangoes. What to speak of a 2 or 3 year old to have such conviction. By the time he'd, even just as a young infant, he'd read all of the Vedas, become very learned in them, and memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita. As he became older, he was actually referred to sometimes as the living encyclopedia. Such was his like vast, amazing knowledge of Vedic literature. He actually established 3 printing presses to spread the message of Krishna consciousness. He initiated a over 60,000 disciples. Such was his compassion and distributing the mercy of Krishna. And he established 64 mats, or 64 centers for spreading Krishna consciousness. And of course, he is the spiritual master of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, and gave him the message to spread Krishna consciousness in the West. Now, before I conclude, I'd just like to demonstrate or give an example of how wonderful the preaching of and how much the compassion of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj is. So upon meeting Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada at that point in time explains that he was very much a follower of Mahatma Gandhi, and he was a believer in Mahatma Gandhi. He felt that everyone should follow Mahatma Gandhi and engage in spreading and gaining independence for India, and that was the most important thing that everyone should be engaged in. So at this point, he met Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj very much being in this mood of, I must support Mahatma Gandhi, and everyone should do so. And Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, he actually explained to Srila Prabhupada and defeated Srila Prabhupada's argument for supporting Mahatma Gandhi, and explained to him nicely that the real goal of life, the real mission, should be spreading of Krishna consciousness. And Srila Prabhupada left, although defeated in that argument, feeling like he wanted to submit his life to Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj. So for me, this is just very, very amazing, because of course we know Srila Prabhupada was a pure devotee, but at the same time, when was the last time you were defeated in an argument and felt like you wanted to surrender to the person who was defeating you? But yet this speaks volumes about the mood of Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, who is able to explain and have such humility and defeat someone in an argument, but make them feel inspired. And this is a real lesson that I try to really learn from, and I pray one day a quality that I can develop in even some small way, that even though along our journeys in Krishna consciousness, we will face many opposers, we'll face many people who are following other spiritual paths, or who are materialistic and opposed to Krishna consciousness, who may be following impersonalist philosophy. And are we able to defeat their arguments, but in a way that inspires them and not makes them feel ashamed, and defeat them in an argument that makes them want to come to Krishna consciousness? I'm not sure if I'll ever get to that point, but I'll continue to pray to Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, and hopefully one day I'll be able to engage in these kind of conversations just like he did. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. So thank you so much for all your kind attention, again for the opportunity to speak on such an auspicious day, and please forgive me for any mistakes, and I'd love to hear any comments, corrections, or questions if we have any.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhuji. And there are so many things that we learned today. At least I learned so many facts that I didn't know about our grandfather, and I'm sure the other devotees as well. And thank you for giving us the acronym on LEARN, and I can use that, and it is so important that it is emphasized that even if you can't do anything for them, giving them prasadam, show some kindness, would be okay. Any questions or comments? Are there any questions or comments? I think everybody's really enjoying.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Hare Krishna Mataji. I was remembering some of pastimes of His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. So I would like to share that. In one of the pastimes, the Jagannath Rath Yatra would pass Bhakti Vinod Thakur's house on the Puri streets of Puri. So every time, because he was the magistrate, Bhakti Vedant Thakur was the magistrate, it would stop in front of his house to for him to give an opportunity to have darshan and arati. So at this time it stopped, and then his Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Mataji's his mother came, brought the baby, and then she placed the baby at the feet of Lord Jagannath, and then he just tried to just bend like this and offer obeisances, and the flower garland fell on him.
Wow.
Yeah. This is one of the pastime, and then there's another pastime I'm remembering in his school. He was always would like to read all the spiritual books on Krishna and Vishnu. So and teacher once came to know that he was reading something else other than the studies what we is supposed to do. Then he said, no, why, what are you doing? You're not studying. What are you doing? Then he said and then the teacher wanted to question him. So then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati answered that question and also answered the future questions. So then he asked him, please, can I continue to read my books, please? So so that was his his prowess on knowledge. And then he was also called as the Ray of Vishnu. So these two pastimes I wanted to narrate.
Oh, thank you so much, Arya Govinda Prabhu. Wonderful. It's so amazing to hear the pastimes. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, just illustrates further Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, even from such a young age. And we can see here, here's another point related to what we've discussed, that it's not, in one sense, normal. How can someone at such a young age have such knowledge, such conviction? And we can see that this is because of his purity. Prabhupada would often say purity is the force. And such was the purity of Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj, and obviously his father, that he was able to, he was certainly empowered by Krishna to have this great understanding. And actually, he was actually amazing he'd studied astrology very much as well, Vedic astrology. So Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj is actually an expert in Vedic astrology as well. And the fact that he was able to defeat people, even his own teachers at such a young age. And as he became older, he was actually known as Nasinga, or the Lion Guru, because he was such amazing at defeating people in arguments. And it was said that actually Mayavadis, they would cross the road when they would see Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj walking, because they did not want to engage in a debate with the Lion Guru, because they knew they would lose. So yes, thank you so much, Arya Govinda Prabhu, for sharing the wonderful pastimes of His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Prabhuji, I have a question. Prabhuji, the Mayavadis are the ones who are envious of Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
So we all are here because of that.
Yes.
We all were envious of Krishna. So does that mean we all are Mayavadis?
Very deep and amazing question, Mataji. So just to kind of repeat the question, the Mayavadis, they don't understand Krishna. They don't take to this, what we call personal philosophy, that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. And often they have an impersonalist view that all is oneness, all is the same. And is it that in one sense, we're here in this material world we've been discussing because we were envious of Krishna, or we wanted to enjoy separately from Krishna? So is it that we are all, in one sense, Mayavadi as well? So my answer to that, again, I would open this up to others more senior, but my answer to that would be yes and no. So yes, in the sense that even within Krishna consciousness, we can see, maybe I can speak for myself, we can identify still elements of our practice that are impersonal, elements of our relationship with Krishna that are impersonal. And an example of this may be that we try and imitate or copy others within Krishna consciousness or services within Krishna consciousness and feel that we should be doing everything, when not realizing that actually we have a personal relationship with Krishna. So yes, we follow the rules laid out by Srila Prabhupada, the 4 regulative principles, the chanting of the Maha Mantra, 16 rounds. But in terms of the way we apply the philosophy to our day-to-day lives, that may look different for different people, depending on their varna and depending on their relationship with Krishna. So we can still identify within our practice of Krishna consciousness these elements of impersonalism within ourselves. And then on an even practical level, and again, I'm speaking for myself, when we're speaking to others, do we treat them as individuals with individual needs and individual concerns? Or do we treat people all in the same way? And this is actually quite impersonal. So even though we're practicing Krishna consciousness and we're trying to develop a personal relationship with Krishna, each of us has a very personal, individual, sweet, sweet relationship with Krishna that we're trying to uncover. And the reason why we're in Krishna consciousness, though, is because, as we said, we maybe the enviousness levels were a bit lower. The desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, as explained wonderfully in the purport today, we maybe became a bit tired of the material existence, and we're finally coming to the point of Krishna consciousness. But also it is said that bhakti is causeless, but there is one cause that everyone on this call has received, which is the causeless mercy of a devotee. So the devotees are so merciful that if our sukriti is just right, if maybe our karma was just right, maybe our envious levels had come down just enough that we were able to receive the mercy of, and actually receive the mercy of a devotee. As I explained many years ago, I actually saw the devotees, but maybe I wasn't at the right level to receive that mercy. But many years later, perhaps I went through some material karma, and maybe I'd become a little less envious. And then when I came into contact with a devotee, I was able to receive the mercy. So I hope that explains. I don't know if that helps, Mataji, but yes, that would be my kind of answer to that question.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Yes, nicely put, Prabhuji. And yes, ISKCON Eldoret has received mercy, and we've got mentors like Mansi Ganga Mataji and Path Prabhuji, who are tirelessly working day and night, 25 hours, not even 24. So I invite Path Prabhuji. Path Prabhuji, kindly unmute and help us.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, sorry, Prabhuji, I cannot on my video because there is no network problem. But
your video is on.
Yeah, video I now just on. Usually I on the video, but due to some problem, this network. Okay, that is happened in here. Okay, thank you, Prabhuji, for your nice and wonderful class. And you are also teaching about the pastimes of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Today is the evidence day of our great Guru of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Also, today is the disappearance day of Srila Purushottam Das Thakur. There are two great Vaishnavas. One is appearance and one is disappearance. And also very nicely, you and Arya Govind Prabhuji also described the pastimes of Srila Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, how he is eminent. And like in the sloka of Siddhanta Danta Harini, who is the out of the philosophy, who is like Mayavadi, they are by their speculation, they are established the principle. Is too much protect, so that it's called the lion guru. He cannot care anyone because the guru is so strong in the philosophy. So very nice, Prabhuji, you are giving the pastimes. It is also our duty. We supposed to know our immediate guru parampara. Already it is restrained in the Bhagavad Gita, and many hope many devotee knows and many devotee not knows, but supposed to be we know who is our great grand guru. So then Baba's Bhakti Purushottam Das Babaji Maharaj, and so many Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, and Jagannath Das Babaji. So many there, so we're supposed to be learned in the Guru Parampara. It's very nice. Prabhuji, one thing is that according to your description in this chapter, it is talking about the compassion. How in this material age of the Kali Yuga, and people have no compassion, and they are so much quarrel. There is a life also very small. They are less intelligent, and so many things will happen. So that for their benefit, Srila Vyasadeva, with the incarnation of Godhead, he wrote this Bhagavatam and all the scriptures. And this is the ultimate scripture, ultimate Purana. It is called the Vedanta. Vedanta means Veda plus Anta. It means there is a Shanti, there is a joint word. It means the end of the Veda. It means to whom, whatever we know the Veda, all the four Veda. If you read the Bhagavatam, you can know what is all the essence of Veda. Okay, it is written. And so that Shukadeva, Sutta Goswami offer his respectful obeisances to both Vyasadeva, who is the compiler of Veda and Bhagavatam. Also, he offer his respectful obeisances to Shuka Goswami, Sukadeva Goswami, who has narrated this one, to Parikshit Maharaj, also among the assembled Vaishnavas. Now, one thing is that you are told in your lecture that the Mayavadis are the envious, so that they did not realize. That is true, or they have no proper knowledge about the God, because the Mayavadi are thinking about Om Brahmasmi. It means you are also Brahma, I am also Brahma. You are also Bhagavan, I am also Bhagavan. Like if you are go to the purport of this Prabhupada commentary, you can read the last verse. Already we read this one. The truth realized as Brahmana, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. It is written clearly. So according our qualification, according our dedication, so we can realize the three. Although three are absolutely true, but we can realize according our quality or qualification. It is my opinion or my learning, whatever we learn from this thing. Maybe Mayavadi, they are up to realization up to Paramatma. They are in the next to the Brahman stage, they are up to Paramatma, but they have no idea or they have no realization up to Bhagavan, because the Bhakta and Bhagavan, they are so related. That is the thing. So enviousness, I think this word is not appropriate for the Mayavadi, because they are Mayavadi, but they are not Nastic, they are not atheistic. They are worshipping the God, but in a different way. How is Prabhuji? They are enviousness, or they have no idea about the things.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes. So I think so. With the Mayavadi school was, first of all, thank you, Partha Prabhu, for explaining so nicely. Like, I'm so grateful to have you explaining so nicely on the call. I think there's different levels, because my limited understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is there's some Mayavadi schools who actually, so we believe of the Brahman, effulgence, Paramatma, Bhagavan. Bhagavan being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They sometimes, some Mayavadi schools, they have it backwards. So they think Bhagavan and then Paramatma and Brahman realization is the highest. That's some Mayavadi schools. But I was just thinking in the purport, Prabhupada is saying that the Mayavadis, yes, sometimes they may lack knowledge, as Partha Prabhu said so nicely. But he does actually say the Mayavadis are envious of the personality of Godhead. So perhaps on some level, they are maybe not on a conscious level, but on some level, they're still envious of God. They may not have the knowledge, but maybe they want to be God. And I remember the pastime in later in the Bhagavatam of the washer of Kamsa's clothes. And he comes across for many, many lifetimes. He had prayed that he wants to see God, but then when then Krishna actually came across him, and he refused. Krishna asked for Kamsa's clothes, And the washerman refused Krishna and said, "Get away, who are you? Just a cowherd boy." So when he had God right in front of him, he refused. And I believe it said that, please correct me if I'm wrong, Pata Prabhu, but I believe that even though he saw God, he saw Krishna right in front of him, he'd prayed for so many lifetimes to have an audience with God. He was able to recognize that Krishna was the supreme personality of Godhead. And as Pata Prabhu explained, and as also I think it was Arya Govinda Prabhu explained, that it's because he wasn't a bhakta. So bhakta, and as Pata Prabhu explained so nicely, bhakta and God are so intimately intertwined, his relationship with his devotees. So yeah, I think that was one such a wonderful point that you made, Pata Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, we have exhausted our time. We can't hear you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, we can't hear you.
Is it okay? Haribol?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Haribol.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji, for your nice class and wonderful explanation. Today is a very nice day for all the devotees. So I request all the devotees, please unmute yourself and chant Hare Krishna mantra for glorification of His Grace, Kamal Panchal Prabhuji. Please join. Hare
Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Vancha
Kalpatarubhishta, Kripa Sindhu Bevacha, Patitanam, Vamebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna, Haribol.
Jai.
Jai.
Haribol.
Haribol.